Hey everyone, welcome to the third episode of The Road to Land a Six-Figure Data Science Job with Richard. So last week we ended on going over a SQL problem, basically focused on forecasting revenue. Pretty tough problem, probably around the medium range, I would say, for SQL. And today we're going to go over basically finishing that problem with Richard and then also working on a new A/B testing case study to also benchmark Richard's skills on case study type problems, specifically around A/B testing. Today, Richard, how are you feeling?
Pretty good. Finished that problem that we were talking about last week. Had a little bit of practice, went through the SQL course. So feeling a little bit more practiced, but yeah, we'll see what you have to throw at me today.
Yeah, let's go over that problem. So let's do it and see kind of like what eventual solution you got to.
Okay, so this is where we left off at last week. I believe just needed to sum up and make the percentages into an actual percent. So that's what I did. I think going through the SQL course, realizing I'm having a little bit of trouble with self joins and manipulating date time data. So I tried to practice that a little bit. But overall, this is what I came up with. Last time we had kind of a temporary table, and I just made it into one kind of bigger query just to see kind of what that looked like.
Can you go over what you did exactly?
Yeah, sure. So again, I just reviewed this question. You need to find the first and last year's revenue by percent of total revenue. What we did was we found the first and last year from the annual payments table, and we kind of did that with a left join, finding the first year with the min statement from the original table, and then also the max year. And so these two left joins basically was passed back into the original table to kind of grab that first and last year. And then once we found those indexes for the first and last year, then we summed up the amount based on those first and last years. So that's what this case statement is doing. So when the first year is not null, then we put the amount in that column and we called that percent first. And then I did a little bit of rounding and then summation to show that by two decimal places. And then I did the same with the last year. And this is what the output gave me, percent first and percent last. Yeah, this is a little bit tricky, to be honest.
All right, cool. So now your assignment next up is to write up that solution. We should probably merge it with this video and then add it to interview queries so that we have an official cohesive solution. And you teaching it to like a general audience will then help out with re-cementing that learning. And then we'll try again in the next episode to go through another SQL question, maybe even a little bit harder, and maybe combining some of the A/B testing skills as well. But I kind of like this approach, right? Because we're starting from SQL. And then we basically, once you start learning SQL, we start with another topic. And then once you start learning that one, and cementing it with practice, we'll go on to another one, and then we'll just continuously hop around between these different topics as we build up your skill set towards an eventual level that you feel comfortable at, where you can answer these questions pretty quickly.
Sounds good.
All right, let's go over the SQL course. Do you have any questions on that part?
Yeah, since we last talked, went about 3/4 of the way through the SQL course on interview query. And then a couple things that I did struggle with. I would say the self joins was kind of a little bit harder to wrap my head around. And especially this question I was looking at right here. The prompt is looking at a payroll schema. The employees table is updating salaries every year, and instead they did an insert instead of an update. And we want to get the latest salary for each employee. And the solution that I came up with while working on this, the inner join with itself looking at the max ID as ID. I have a little bit of experience in Python and kind of think about it that way. This inner join, it really clicked for me thinking about how I'm passing in like a certain parameter, in this case, max ID, into a function, which is the rest of this query, to get the latest ID for that salary.
Nice.
I think this concept was a little bit harder for me to really make click in my head. This kind of structure is a lot different from, let's say, like a Python function where you're like defining something and then you're doing something in that function and then spitting it out. This is a more linear structure where you have to interjoin with itself. So that's something that I've tried really hard to think about. Last time you told me to just start with the output and then work backwards from there. I have a really hard time not like looking at the table, looking at the contents of the table, and then like kind of working forward. Working backwards is something that I definitely need a little more practice on. And then again, like I said, date times also a little bit tricky for me. Just it's a different data type, but I'm working my way through it.
Nice. Okay. On your first point about the self-joins, subqueries, a lot of that comes easier to people that have done a lot of Excel because they're used to applying functions to tables and then basically integrating those tables back into their formula. But I like your Python analogy. That makes a lot of sense, especially if you think about a function within a function. I would say that's pretty similar for here. Also, if you've worked in pandas before, it's a little bit easier to think about that because a lot of the times you take one data frame, you manipulate it, and then you have to like merge it with another one that's basically the exact same thing as a subquery in SQL, right? Because at the end of the day, we need basically to pass in these functions to get other values that we care about. And that's just subqueries. Working backwards, that's usually very helpful for people that can visualize the output. I mean, I don't know if it's any easier than working forwards, but I would say, you know, when you do work backwards, there are logical next steps, right, towards where you want to be and what kind of applications and aggregations that you apply to your end result that you can kind of go back from. And those are easiest for, I think, a lot of queries that require aggregations versus subqueries, I would say. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, if you're getting a summary stat, like let's get the percentage of revenue for the first year, right? It's a lot easier to work backwards from that because then you have to think about, all right, how do I actually get this myself if I were to like run this query or to build this out in like an Excel table, right? Or do it manually. And I would say that is where you kind of understand, you know, oh, wait, I need these tables, like these rows to understand that I need the total sum and stuff like that. So I'm glad that you're at the medium part. And it looks like the next step, once you finish this medium one, is going to be the hard section, which is definitely building on top of subqueries, on top of subqueries.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the more that I do these problems, the more that I recognize some structures are the same. Like I reuse the same structures, like I said, passing in like a function or an inner join with itself based on finding a value within the same table. I think these come up over and over. Case statements to find another column, a value based on another column. I think that's the structure that'll come up again and again. I think it's just practice and just kind of recognizing and seeing these structures over and over again.
Great. Awesome. I see your streak is 2. Let's get that up to 9 next time we talk.
Okay.
All right. Let's dive into a case study question. And I will find one and send it over to you. So let's start out with this question. All right. So let's say that you work for an online media company. The media company is starting to monetize its web traffic and wants to experiment with adding web banners into the middle of its reading content to see if it can monetize effectively. How would you measure the success of the banner ad strategy?
So a web banner in the middle of its reading content. I would first have 2 versions of this test. So the control, maybe without having the banner. So we need the control, then the variant, and then also some way to track if the customer went through its purchasing process or bought the product. So we need some sort of results. Now that we have 2 buckets of the population, one with control and variant, and then some test results, probably look at how much revenue was obtained by each population. And I would probably say the actual conversion rate by each population. And then was this conversion rate statistically significant? Because there's obviously going to be people who convert anyways without this ad banner, is what I'm thinking. So we need to make sure this is actually having an effect on the conversion rate. And then we'll start from there. Once we have kind of these higher level metrics, then we do a deeper dive into each of these buckets. What were the characteristics of each customer, whether they converted in bucket 1 or bucket 2. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking right now.
Okay, so let's jump back to the very beginning again. What is the control and what is the variant? Because you talked about both and you talked about measuring, running an A/B test. Let's just define these. What is the control and what is the variant? Because I didn't feel like I got a very good definition from you on what those were.
So the experiment is adding web banners into the middle of its reading content. So I would say
is that the experiment? You just proposed the experiment, right? In the question, they said they want to experiment. So I think as the candidate, you have to propose what that experiment is.
I would say the experiment is having a banner and then not having a web banner.
Cool.
Would that be
But
accurate?
let's go even more specifically right now, right? Because if you
Okay.
tell this to a PM at a company, they're like, banner, no banner. They're going to be like, okay, what do I tell the engineers? Is it 50% of the time a banner shows up randomly in an article? Also, exactly what is this media company? Right. So let's be even more specific. Let's say that you literally have to write the code to basically set up this experiment now. How would you set it up and be more detailed and kind of like what the process looks like? So we know that we want to run an experiment. We know that we want to show a banner sometimes, and we don't want to show a banner other times. But let's be more specific about what that means.
Okay, I think you made a good point. This experiment does need to be random to make sure that what we're doing is effective. So what I'm thinking is when a visitor is scrolling through the website, reading through articles, 50% of the time show a web banner that is stopping the visitor from reading further. And if they want to view more content or do interact more with the website, get more value to the website, then basically have some sort of paywall or a banner that kind of asks them, if you want to read further, subscribe. So 50% of the time do that. And then the other 50% of the time, randomly just let them keep reading on. Maybe do this experiment for, let's say, 1 or 2 months, and then sum up how many people got the control variant of no banner, and then how many people got the variant of having a banner. And then from there, sum up the numbers. What is the conversion rate of no banner? And then what is the conversion rate of banner?
Okay. So I see a few kinks in your plan, but I like the general idea. So now you created the framework of the experiment, which is great for the very beginning of this kind of analysis, right? But I want to point out a few things. First off, when you said paywall, you are automatically then assuming that this media company monetizes off of subscriptions. Is that correct?
Yes, that is what I'm assuming.
Okay. So that's something that you got to state in the very beginning, right? Because that's not clear from this question, actually. And that's not actually clear from your answer either, because you could monetize in two different ways. One is web banners to subscribe for paywalled content. So that is like the monetization method. The second one is ads, right? And where we're putting web banners in and we're hoping that people click on it to then purchase something, right? So I see a Nike ad in the middle of my article on the New York Times, correct? So which one are you trying to specifically set up this experiment for? Is it paywall for more content that can't be read? Or is it for ads?
I guess looking back at the question prompt, this is an advertising question. So then I would have to assume this is not a subscription-based monetization strategy.
Okay. So then specifically, we're talking about banner ads then, right? So everything on the website is free, and we're just trying to then set up banner ads. Do you see how that could be a little bit bad if you kind of jump into it without defining the business model? Because now your entire experiment kind of needs to be reworked, right? Your initial assumptions are wrong, and now you kind of have to go back. So let's go back to the very beginning and redo that experiment analysis again and say, what would be the experiment now that you know the monetization strategy is to set up ads?
Okay, so to set up ads, I would assume it would have to be like ads on like the side of the page. I would have to say that the experiment would then be the amount of ads or maybe no ads. And as somebody who reads articles on the web, I would say if it's too many ads, I very easily get annoyed. I would click away from the page. So in this kind of rethinking that, in this case, I would say maybe the control would be like one banner ad, maybe on the top or on the side. And then the variant would be maybe more than one, two banner ads, three banner ads, kind of more around the page, presenting more frequently to the reader. So in that case, the rest of the experiment, I would kind of set up similarly. The control variant being show one ad all the time, and then see how many people click on this ad, and then try to get analytics from that, how many people convert, how many people buy when looking at only one ad. And then the variant would then be, let's say, two ads on this web page, and see the conversion rate for that and run it for 1 to 2 months and see which strategy was more successful with the conversion rate, how many people click on it, how many people were shown the ad. And then again, from there, calculate things like revenue and then conversion rate, and then the different behaviors of people in each of these control and variant buckets.
Okay, cool. So we set up that the control is one ad everywhere on every single article, and the variant is two. Do we care about basically setting up another variant subpopulation where there's no ads?
I would say no, because there has to be some sort of baseline, or if this is the only way that this company monetizes their content, they have to have something somewhere. And I'm assuming no ads would not make them any money.
The question says the media company is starting to monetize its web traffic, right? So what does the baseline mean? Does the baseline mean that they've been running ads the entire time, or that they have not been running ads?
You're right. So if they're just starting to, then that means they have not had ads before.
Okay. So then does it make sense to add a variant where they don't run any ads?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, but why?
Because there's visitors are already used to not seeing ads on their website. And we then want to track the change in behavior between their original content without ads and then how the visitors would react with then seeing ads.
Okay, but then if the media company has to make money, right, then why should we even track this control variant either way? Because you said you want to see the change in behavior. What kind of change in behavior would we want to track?
I think that how like the time spent on the website by each visitor, does that change? Is the length of time now shorter or longer?
Right.
I think that's something that they have to see more deeply. If the ads are say driving away these visitors, then that's probably something that they don't want to decrease the amount of ads shown to visitors in the first place.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I think that's a great point. So we have this experiment, right? We have no ads as a control. We have one ad as another variant, and then we have n number of ads, let's say, as like the third variant. How do these get distributed? Does a user randomly see one of these three buckets every single time they land on the site? Or is it a user only sees one of these, either no ads or one ads for, a few months, basically, on every single article?
I would say probably it'd just be a random distribution between the three, no matter if it's the same visitor or a different visitor. In that case, we could track their behaviors in each bucket, even though it's the same person. Maybe if they see no ads, the same person stays for longer on this website. Or, if it's one ad, then they stay for this amount of time, or two ads, they stay for even longer or shorter.
Okay, so you're talking about session-based experimentation. So I could show up on like the New York Times, let's say, and I could see like 5 ads, and then I could close my window or go to a new article and then suddenly see no ads.
Yes.
Okay. And your reasoning for doing this is what?
I'd say each session that a visitor spends on a website is unique, and we could then track the effect of these experiments based on sessions. And if the different sessions between each user and the different experiments, if that changes their behavior, seeing each variant of this experiment.
Sure. So let's say that we do that, right? And how are we measuring the success then of this experiment? What tells us which one we should show continuously?
I would say the variant that gives them the most monetization, even though they spend a longer or short amount of time. I think that if a media company wants to monetize, I think that is the kind of response that we look for. Which variant of the experiment maximizes or optimizes the revenue that this company generates. Balance between
the one that has no ads is going to lose, right? Just up front. That's just simple human behavior, right? They don't see any ads. They're not going to make any money. This variant automatically loses. So why don't we even have this variant anymore, right? At this point, then again, like kind of what we were talking about, if our success metric is maximizing the amount of revenue that we're getting.
I think we still need something to compare it to, like what it was before and the changes in behavior from there. You're right. If the control variant's always going to lose, then we're not going to show that. But I think that if a company wants to keep operating kind of going forward, they have to make money. They can't just keep showing no ads and not making money. Then eventually they'll run out of money and not be able to sustain its business.
Well, then why don't we just put an ad in between every single paragraph?
I think that in that case, it would drive away visitors.
Okay. So you say your North Star metric is making money, but technically it's not, because we're not putting in a variant that basically puts an ad on the entire page, right? And barely has any content. So technically then, what is your actual North Star metric, or what are other metrics that you have to keep in mind, right? If I'm going to make $10 compared to $9, in what scenarios would I choose like the $9 per user than the $10 per user per session or something?
I'd say if there's more users coming in for the $9 than the $10, then obviously looking at, stepping back, looking at a kind
What
of
does more users mean? I thought we were running an experiment and it's $9 per user, right? So that even if you have more users, that doesn't really do anything, right?
Right, because we're saying 50% of the time, or just the balanced percent of the time, each user is being shown a different variant.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's something I haven't thought about before. I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll pose you another question, right? So again, like I said before, we have, let's say, $9 per user, we have $10 per user, then we have the control with 0 ads. All right. Now, let's say that basically we have another metric that looks at the length of time that they spend on the website. So the control now has 10 minutes. The one that has one ad at $9 per user, let's say monetization, has basically 5 minutes. And the one that's $10 per user is at 2 minutes time spent on the platform. Now, how do you choose which one is the correct variant to go forward with?
I would say then the length of time that they spend on the website, because if they spend more time on the website, then in total for that session, they'll see more ads. If the one ad would be variant that they're shown all the time, then seeing more ads will drive more revenue overall.
Okay, but we're talking about over time, right? We're not talking about time spent. And then also when you talk about more time spent seeing ads, that's actually kind of a formula for this $9 per user that I'm thinking about, right? Because technically, right, if we're thinking about monetization, let's say I click on 3 ads over one article that equals to $9 for that user for the session, then that's a function of how long I spent reading the article. Right. So it's kind of weird to think about it that way. All right. So I'll wrap it up and I'll point out a few key things that I think are technical mistakes versus structural mistakes here, along with the things that you did well. I can tell that you've never really answered a case question before by the way that you jumped into this problem. And it's actually a great example of how you're thinking about the problem now versus how you might be thinking about it later down the line. If you've seen any of the mock interviews that we do on the Interview Query channel, you can tell that we generally have a formula for how we answer these things, right? We go with clarification of the problem, then we set the goals of the case study or the goals of the business or the experiment, and then we structure an answer, and then we kind of dive into specifically defining a hypothesis and then supporting it with a solution or an answer. When we're thinking about this sort of problem, right? Remember in the beginning how you kind of dived in and then you answered it and then you realized, oh, wait, actually, this isn't going to work because we don't even know how this business makes money. So now that it makes money differently, we have to think about it differently. That's kind of a core thing that we do in the very beginning. And we eventually got to that clarification step that this is an online media company. It makes money in these ways, and it can be monetized by testing out these different kinds of experiments, right? And I would say even in this problem, we could go even deeper than that. We could talk about like how we make money through web traffic, right? Because there's different models to make money through web traffic. There is cost per click on an ad where an advertiser pays us for every single time that we get a click. There's cost per impression where basically an advertiser pays us every single time we place their ad in the newsfeed. And then there's affiliate-based model systems, right? Where we only get paid if the user clicks on the ad and then purchases an item and then brings us money back. So there's even more definitions that we can put into, which increases the number of variants for how we test different kinds of advertising models in this question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Defining the problem is super hard. It takes a lot of context. If you've never worked in advertising, then you would never understand that these models exist, right? Which is kind of something that I could see there from the way that you answered the question. But that's okay, because the next step of it is talking about the structure of the answer, right? And the structure of the technical answer here. And you made one kind of very key mistake here, which is talking about session-based A/B testing versus user-based A/B testing. Now, do you know what the difference between those two are?
Not really, to be honest.
Okay, take a guess.
Session based is like if the one time you spend on a website is one session versus a user tracks the lifetime of a user and how their activity or their behaviors on a certain website.
Yeah, I think that's basically it. A user-based A/B test, right, is that if I'm one user, then I get the same variant for the entire lifetime of the test, right? So if I click on and I get bucketed into seeing only one ad versus 0 and 5 ads, let's say, then I see one ad every single place that I go. But when you talk about session-based A/B testing, that's basically if I change my session, and that's not really even what you said in this case scenario, actually. You said that if I go to another article, I might see a different kind of variation of ads. But session-based is basically that if I open a browser, or if you think about like a session somewhere, like you're going somewhere, you're coming, you're leaving, you're coming back, that's 2 sessions, but one session is just going somewhere and then coming back. So one session here would be opening the browser, going to the New York Times, only seeing one ad on every single article until I close my browser, I reopen it again, and then I get a new variant, and it's random at that step. Now, usually we don't do that. We definitely don't do the one where we go to every single article and we get a new random one, because that doesn't show us the behavior of repeat visits, right? Because now, let's say that I get 1 ad on my first time, I get 5 ads on my second time, I get 0 ads on my third time. Now I'm in this interaction bucket where I'm 1, 5, and 0. Right? Someone else could be 0 ads, 5 ads, 1 ads, or 0 ads, 0 ads, 0 ads. So technically, these are all multiple buckets, right? Because maybe if I see 1 ad and then 5 ads and then 0, I'll interact with the website in one certain way versus if I did 1 ad, 0 ads, 1 ads, and then 5 ads. That's why we want to be more consistent, because these are all kind of multiple interaction effects that add on to like the experimentation here. That makes it really hard for us to control for specific variables, which is the number of ads that a user might see. You get what I'm saying here?
Right. Yeah. Now that you kind of describe in this way, it would be really hard to track that behavior for one bucket if it always keeps jumping around, showing different variants for every web page. So I kind of see that now.
Exactly. Right. Like our goal is to understand how advertising affects the users. We can only do that if we give them a consistent experience so that we eliminate other causal effects. Because at the end of the day, with large populations, it's very difficult to eliminate large causal effects. Because if you think about it, if I'm one user, I'm like in a certain demographic, right? I'm Asian American, 30 years old, lives on the West Coast, and I come to the user and I see some certain variants, right? Someone else could be completely different, white, 50 years old, some other background, comes to the website, sees the same variant as me or a different variant, right? We're going to have different kinds of backgrounds, understandings, and basically general interaction effects that are going to cause variance in basically how likely we are to click on ads. But specifically, when we control for it, we have to basically try to figure out how to control for all these background effects and figuring out exactly how much ads that we can show them on the website, which is why we need huge population sizes for these experiments. So the more things that we can lower in terms of variance on our experience, the better that is. Ideally, I'd be testing only one specific demographic of user that's really similar to understand how to maximize their amount of ads. But we can't really do that in online businesses. I mean, we can, but like generally it's really hard because you need a lot of data. The last key point I want to make is basically understanding the metric of time spent versus overall engagement. You're right that we want to basically monetize the maximum amount of value from each user at the end of the day. But the best way to do that is if a user comes back to our site 2 years from now and continuously views the site versus we monetize them in the short term, right? We're talking about long-term engagement versus short-term revenue maximization. It's not good if people see a lot of ads and they don't go back to your website and go to the Wall Street Journal instead versus someone who, let's say, sees only one ad potentially, but at least continues to be brand loyal and continues to check out the website. I think time spent is one metric that's really important. It's a short-term metric maximization component though, because it's basically how much time you spend reading the article and how many ads you see within that article. I think a better metric though is longer term time spent over the customer lifetime, or like retention is a great example and the one that I bring up a lot in these case interviews. And that's something that we have to measure and understand the downstream effects for. Because for any kind of business, even if you're a paywall business, even for interview query, we want to understand exactly how much engagement and churn kind of matters to the formula, especially because we don't want to churn out our customers or churn out our readers. We want to make sure that they're getting value every single time while also making us money. That's one thing that you really have to understand for the behavior, which is the control variant, right? Is kind of basically the variant that showcases if we do nothing, this is what happens. And if we change something, then this is what happens. Then Y is what happens, right? And we want to compare all these metrics against each other.
That totally makes sense how you're describing it now. The long-term engagement of the user is much more important than the short-term one-time article that they come to the website to read.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of different ways that we can deep dive into it. I think good first steps that you took were that you did understand the exact structure of the case study. You understood that we had to run an experiment. You understood that we had to have control and variance and that we needed a measure of success. But I think when it comes to the finer technical details, that's where you struggle. And that's where you'll get better by tackling more and more case studies. As a homework assignment now, you're going to start the introduction to A/B testing learning path on interview query. And once you start that, we're going to go tackle maybe another case study next week or the week after to see exactly what you've learned from doing these more beginner type case studies and reading about exactly how we should be framing experiments in the future.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks for watching, everyone. What we know about Richard, to summarize, we know that Richard can solve medium SQL questions. Depending on how fast you can solve them, kind of sets up his level and performance on SQL. We also know that Richard is a beginner at A/B testing and case studies like all of us were before. And so we'll have Richard practice A/B testing and case study type experiments over the next week or two to get better at that. And next time when we jump in, we'll be talking and either solving a harder level SQL question or a harder level A/B testing question, or moving on to a new skill set such as machine learning and testing Richard's knowledge there as well. All right. Thanks for watching, everyone, again, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.